Hi, welcome to the Louie File. I wanted to talk to you a little bit today based out of the letter of Romans. The Apostle Paul wrote the letter of the Romans to the Romans. Apparently it was sent ahead of his arrival. Before he had ever been to Rome, he wrote this letter to the believers there, sort of as an introduction as to who he was and what he was all about. Which, if you know anything about the letter to the Romans, it was all about Christ. It was all about what Christ has done on our behalf as fallen humans. And he really walks us step by step through this, and it's such an amazing letter. I don't think you could ever exhaust it. But I just want to share a little bit with you today. In the first chapter of the letter to the Romans, Paul says he thanks God because he'd been hearing about their faith. I mean, that their faith has been proclaimed throughout the world. I mean, that is pretty great. And he said he longed to see them so that he could impart some kind of spiritual gift to them, and that they may be established. And that basically, I can't wait to meet you, fellow brothers of mine in Christ, so that we can be an encouragement to one another. So that is a really great introduction, and he moves swiftly into the fact that fallen man has fallen and has turned from God and have become separated from Him because of, not because there's not enough evidence around us in the world. I mean, he says all of creation is telling us something about the Godhead, but rather than retain that knowledge and rather than glorify God, our foolish hearts were darkened. I mean, we didn't acknowledge God and we weren't thankful, so we became foolish. We became hardened in our understanding of things and blinded. So it says in a series of just really bad stuff in the first chapter of Romans, it says, so God gave them over. And He gave them over, and He gave them over. I mean, basically, God's not violating our will. And if we choose to attempt to make it on our own without Him, then He just lets us. That's how much He loves us. He loves us so much that He will not violate our will. He just simply will not barge into our lives. He will show us many, many things, I mean, to encourage us to come to Him, but we have to finally, ultimately choose to do it. So there you have it. So the first chapter of Romans is basically telling us that we're all in a mess, but it's because we have just completely refused to acknowledge God and see Him for who He is. And so then in chapter 2 of Romans, Paul goes on into the fact that Jew and Gentiles are both in this same boat, and it doesn't matter if you have got the law of God or if you don't have the law of God. Either way, in chapter 3, he says all have sinned and fallen short of the glory. But the good news is that through Christ we can be made right. We can be justified. So then in chapter 4 of Romans, he says, well, what can we learn about this faith thing by looking to Abraham's life? Paul always referred back to Abraham, which is known as the father of our faith, because he was just a regular dude, just a regular guy that heard the voice of God and listened to what God said. So he just lived by faith. In Romans 4 it says that Abraham believed God, and God counted it or reckoned it unto him as righteousness. There you go. And then, of course, we get a lot of details in chapter 4 about what that means. And the question is asked of Abraham, well, was it before or after he was circumcised? Before or after he had really gained this covenant with God? Well, the circumcision was a sign of the covenant, but it says that he believed God prior to circumcision, therefore he was called righteous by God before he was circumcised. So he was not particularly religious or even, in a sense, Jewish. He wasn't even, there wasn't really anything called a Jew yet. But maybe that's not the time to look into that. So the first 4 chapters tell us that we've all fallen, Jew and Gentile alike. We've all sinned and fallen short of the glory. But God has sent His Son, and He has made a propitiation. He has done something that can bring about putting God and His Spirit in right relationship with Him back to man. And our part is to simply believe what God is saying, to simply believe into Him, receiving the promise of God, even when it doesn't look like it makes sense. At the end of chapter 4 in Romans, it says that Abraham was an old man and Sarah's womb was barren. But Abraham believed. He hoped beyond hope. So he understood that God could bring life from an old dead man and an old dead womb. And that's exactly what he did by bringing forth Isaac, who was a picture of the one that was to come. That we find out in Galatians, the Apostle Paul, the same author, tells us that Jesus Christ is the seed, singular, of Abraham. He is the promise fulfilled. So we place our faith in Christ, and we too get to walk by faith and be declared righteous because we believe God. I'll talk to you. We'll move on into the next few chapters in the next video. I hope you stick around. Thanks.